protein for the general population do we need to intake per day? Because we see very different guidelines on these, recommendations on these. A lot of the recommendations that we see from social media are coming from an athlete's perspective more than a general population perspective. What is the norm for people listening in?
Well, the first thing is athletes have taught us a lot. They're the sort of higher 1-2% of the population, the elite athletes. So clearly there's a lot of attention gone to that. But in studying that subset, that particular cohort, we've learned a lot about the process. About 30 years ago, it was recommended very, very widely by all the major evidence that actually protein intake, rather than decreasing in age, should increase. And that's because that process of synthesis, when you stimulate it through dietary intake and exercise, is blunted. Okay, so you need more to stimulate it. So the dietary recommendations, I don't know what your body mass is, but approximately 1.91 gram of good quality protein per day. Okay, so for an average person, that's between about 90 to 120 grams of protein per day. What you need to do in aging is increase that by about 30-40%. So you need to get that to about 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body mass per day. That's a sort of rough guideline. And that's been out there for about 30 years now and has proved successful.
Okay, so it's beginning at 1 gram. As you get older, eat more protein, get a little bit more into you, so 1.2 grams per kilo body weight. Presumably that's up to a certain weight, because if you suffer from the disease of obesity, that those numbers won't quite apply, one would imagine.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty that we have in general application to populations. Of course, it changes. It changes in the course. Everything's related to body weight in a lot of areas, but the specifics are, of course, that we have to adjust that if you are on the obese scale. The other main thing about that nutrient intake is that I don't know about you, but you probably have your steak at night. In other words, most people would take their main protein intake at the main dinner occasion, right? Okay, so that is in error. That's not optimum. If you think about a year, you have 3 times 365, about 1,000 eating occasions. Each of those eating occasions influences the rate of protein synthesis. Okay, so if you have an optimal stimulus at each of the eating occasions, then you can get an optimal 1,000-fold stimulus to protein synthesis. Brilliant, isn't it? The problem is people don't do that. On their eating occasions, they load everything normally into one meal. You'll probably have about 10 grams of protein in the morning with your breakfast, probably about 20 with your lunch, and then the main bolus of protein intake is in the evening. Okay, but the stimulus to muscle protein synthesis will be no greater if you have 30 grams or 60 grams. In fact, the recommendation is to split your protein load, that 100 or 90, 120, into 3 equal amounts across the day. Okay, and that takes some modification, that takes some thinking. I related to one of the researchers earlier that when we were out in the field doing this, discussing this in the community sessions, one very nice dear lady said to us, well, does that mean that my Jimmy, I have to split his steak into 3 and offer him a third during the day? And I said, well, actually, yes. She said, you won't like that. So we do have to use some creative thinking and get that education out there that's much better. And just as a rider to that, athletes do that 4 times a day because they recognize that in the overnight phase, okay, there's no stimulus. So they feed before they go to bed. Okay. And in the real athlete, where we're trying to do this, we actually infuse it during the night. That's how the higher end, shall we say, of the spectrum is informing what we do as the general public.
And we've mentioned once or twice already, and I love talking about it because it's something I feel very passionate about, is that idea of muscle mass, not just body composition, not just body weight is something that we should know. So people listening in, the weight on its own or a BMI scale, it's just saying you're a certain height, you should be a certain weight. It doesn't tell us really a whole lot about the body in terms of muscle mass and fat mass, and that really everyone listening in should know how much muscle mass they have and track it, and how much fat mass they have and track it. It should be a general population kind of health indicator for healthy aging.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a very, very important point, and it's very difficult to break away from what was called the quintlet index, the body mass index, which is basically height and weight. Those are the two things. That was developed in the 18th century, and a stamp it's a Belgian. He wrote a lovely treatise, and effectively it's been developed through Ansel Keys and a few other people into this thing called the body mass index. But if you think about it, most women have a higher fat mass than men. And yet the body mass index is exactly the same for men and women, which makes that the average woman, we have a database at UL of about 7,500 people. The average woman will probably have about 33 to 35% body fat. And if you told them that, they get absolutely paranoid about it because they think that's much, much too high. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's an influence that BMI. The BMI says that's within sort of normal range. So BMI has been discussed a lot, but it was developed by the World Health Organization as a population index, not as an individual index. So it's fine to compare Indians with South Africans, with Asians, with Irish, etc., but it's not really as an individual basis. So one example, you are probably somewhere in the region of about 82, 84 kilos.
Will you come on as a guest on the show every week? I love that. What am I now? I'm 90. I'm 91 at the minute, but there we go. It can vary between 88 and about. Actually, my peak racing weight when I was doing Ironmans and ultramarathons, my peak racing weight was 83 kgs. It never went. It would sit at that. It would never go any lower. And I do marathon open water swimming now, and all the 2 years of hard swimming. My muscle mass my body fats are pretty much the same, but my muscle mass has ramped right up. I've got shoulders and biceps and triceps, and anyway, there we go. I'm at 91 now. So there we go.
Well, there you are. You see, but probably your height hasn't changed.
No, at all. If anything, I've shrunk because I'm 44. I'm shrinking. My discs are shrinking.
but see, that's the thing. And the BMI is between 18.5 and 25 for normal. Well, you can do the maths. So for somebody of about 80, 90 kilos, you could be something in the region of between 18 to 20 kilos difference between a BMI at 18.5 and a BMI at 24. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what that means, of course, that you're not on the radar. Okay. So if you were just on a BMI of 18.6, or you were just on a BMI of 24.9 type of business, there could be 20 kilo difference. Do you understand me? So when that's used as a health index, then there's a complication with that, because those 20 kilos could be an extra 20 kilos of fat. Do you see how that works? So in answer to the education on this, shall we say, you can get better information. A lot of pharmacists, chemists and stuff do what's called a bioelectric impedance, a BIA. Okay, now the BIA, it depends on the nature of the machine, but that will give you a breakdown of your fat, your muscle, etc. And that is probably better than using BMI alone. My only reservation to that is, from a technical perspective, you can influence that impedance by what you've got on your hands, what clothes you're wearing, what position you're in, and things like this, pre-exercise and hydration. So it can be distorted quite widely.